I'm Martha Wilson, 68, and I've been staring at this open door for nearly an hour now. After 32 years of marriage to Richard, I finally used the key I found among his hospital belongings. The office he kept locked every single night. The space I was never allowed to enter. Now, as I stand frozen in the doorway, looking at the passports, photographs of a woman with children, and documents in languages I don't understand, I can barely breathe. The Richard Wilson I buried last week was not the man I thought I married. And as I stood there, looking at evidence of a life I never knew existed, I understood why he kept that door locked every single night. Before I dive into this story that changed everything I thought I knew about my life, I'd love to know where you're watching from. If you've ever had your trust completely shattered, hit that like button. Sometimes the people closest to us are the biggest strangers, and I'm about to share how discovering my husband's betrayal ultimately gave me something I never expected. Subscribe to hear more real-life family stories that prove truth is stranger than fiction. I met Richard Wilson when I was 36, already settled into what I thought would be a lifelong career as a librarian at Boston Public Library. I dated here and there, but never found anyone who quite fit into my quiet, book-filled life. Then Richard walked in one rainy Tuesday afternoon, looking for resources on financial planning. He was 38, confident, charming, and somehow made my sensible cardigan and practical shoes feel like the most elegant outfit in the world. Our courtship was brief but intense. Within 6 months, we were married in a small ceremony attended by my colleagues and a handful of Richard's business associates. I remember being slightly surprised at the absence of any family or childhood friends on his side, but he explained it away easily. Orphaned young, moved around a lot, he'd say with a smile that somehow discouraged further questions. "You're my family now, Martha. We bought a lovely colonial in a respectable suburb outside Boston." Richard's financial advisory business thrived, and I continued my work at the library until I retired at 62. Our life together was comfortable, predictable, and by most measures, happy. We never had children. Richard had been upfront about not wanting them, and I'd adjusted my expectations accordingly. The rules about his office were established early. It was on the ground floor, a converted den with a solid oak door. "Client confidentiality," Richard explained on our first day in the house. "I'll need to keep sensitive financial documents secure. Best if we establish a clear boundary when the door is closed or locked. Please don't disturb me." It seemed reasonable enough. Many professionals bring work home, after all. I never questioned why a financial advisor would need quite so much privacy, or why the heavy deadbolt he installed was necessary for protecting investment portfolios and retirement plans. The locked office became part of our evening ritual. After dinner, Richard would kiss my cheek and say, "Just need to wrap up some work, darling. I'll be up soon." I'd hear the lock click, and that would be the last I'd see of him until morning most nights. I'd head upstairs with my book, fall asleep reading, and sometimes wake to feel him slipping into bed past midnight. There were moments over the years when I almost challenged this arrangement, like the night I heard him speaking in what sounded like another language, harsh consonants and unfamiliar cadences filtering through the door when I came downstairs for a glass of water. When I mentioned it the next morning, he laughed it off. Probably just me cursing at the computer in gibberish. You know how technology frustrates me. Then there were the phone calls he'd never take in my presence, the mail he'd intercept before I could see it, the occasional weekend emergency client meetings that would take him away for days at a time. Small inconsistencies that I dismissed as the peculiarities of a private man with a demanding career. I had built a life around his boundaries. For 32 years, I respected that locked door. I told myself it was what made our marriage work, this mutual respect for privacy, this unquestioning trust. Looking back, I see how completely I'd normalized his secrecy, how thoroughly I'd convinced myself that this was simply how some marriages functioned. Richard's death was sudden, a massive heart attack while at his downtown office. He was 70, still working full-time with no plans to retire. I got the call on a Thursday afternoon while deadheading roses in our garden. By the time I reached the hospital, he was gone. The funeral was sparsely attended, mostly business associates and neighbors. Not a single childhood friend or distant relative made an appearance. At the time, I attributed this to Richard's solitary nature and our advanced age. So many people our age had already passed on or were too infirm to travel. After the service, the hospital called to say they had Richard's personal effects ready for pickup. His wallet, watch, wedding ring, and a ring of keys I'd never seen before. Among them was a small brass key that didn't match any lock in our house except, I suddenly realized, the office door. It took me 3 days after the funeral to work up the courage. I stood outside that door, key in hand, for nearly 20 minutes before inserting it into the lock. Even as a widow, I felt I was transgressing, violating a sacred trust. But Richard was gone, and whatever secrets he'd kept were now mine to discover. I turned the key, heard the deadbolt slide, and pushed the door open. That's when my entire understanding of my life with Richard began to unravel. The office looked normal at first glance. A large mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, with a leather chair behind it and 2 client chairs in front. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with financial texts and binders labeled with what appeared to be client names. A computer sat on the desk, its screen dark. The room smelled of Richard's sandalwood cologne and the lemon polish I'd taught him to use on the wood furniture. For a moment, I felt foolish. What had I expected? Some shrine to a secret life? Evidence of nefarious activities? This was simply a home office, professional and organized, exactly what you'd expect from a financial advisor. Then I noticed the small details. The binders had no dust on top, despite Richard refusing my offers to clean the room over the years. The books on the shelves were perfectly aligned, almost as if they were never used. It looked less like a working office and more like a stage set designed to look like one. I moved toward the desk, my hands trembling slightly as I pulled open the top drawer. Inside were the usual office supplies, pens, paper clips, post-it notes. Nothing unusual. The second drawer held file folders with client names I recognized. The third was locked. I tried the keys from the hospital ring, and the third one opened it. Inside was a false bottom, cleverly constructed. When I removed it, I found a 9mm pistol, clean and well-maintained, with 2 full ammunition clips beside it. Richard had never mentioned owning a gun. In 32 years of marriage, he had never once shown any interest in firearms. My heart was pounding now as I moved to the filing cabinet in the corner. The top 2 drawers contained what appeared to be legitimate client files. The bottom drawer, also locked, contained an entirely different set of documents. Here I found passports, 6 of them, from different countries. All had Richard's photograph, but the names were different. Nikolai Petrov, Alexander Kuznetsov, Mikhail Baranov, and others I can't remember now. Behind the passports was a manila envelope filled with cash, euros, pounds, yen, and currencies I couldn't identify. Thousands of dollars worth, at least. In a separate folder were newspaper clippings, some in English, others in what looked like Russian, German, and Hebrew. The English ones detailed financial crimes and investigations into money laundering operations. Several names were highlighted, none of which I recognized. My legs felt weak, and I lowered myself into Richard's chair. That's when I noticed the framed photograph face down in the drawer. I picked it up, turned it over, and felt the air leave my lungs. It showed a younger Richard, perhaps in his 30s, standing with a dark-haired woman and 2 children, a boy and a girl, maybe 8 and 5. They were standing in front of what looked like a Russian Orthodox church, snow on the ground around them. All 4 were smiling, a family portrait. I set the photograph down with shaking hands and continued my exploration. The bookshelf had a section that slid aside to reveal a wall safe. Another key on the ring opened it. Inside, I found more cash, jewelry that wasn't mine, and stacks of documents in multiple languages. Many featured what appeared to be financial statements for offshore accounts with balances in the millions. In another drawer, I discovered a collection of burner phones, each labeled with initials and dates. A leather-bound notebook contained what looked like codes or ciphers, alongside dates and monetary amounts. Some entries were marked with red stars, others with check marks. The computer was password protected, of course. I tried our anniversary, Richard's birthday, combinations of our names, all the usual suspects without success. I would need help to access whatever secrets it held. As the reality of what I was finding sank in, my body began to react physically to the shock. My stomach lurched, and I barely made it to the small adjoining bathroom before vomiting. Afterward, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at myself in the mirror. Who was the woman looking back at me? Certainly not Martha Wilson, devoted wife of financial advisor Richard Wilson. That woman had never existed except in my mind. Among the papers was a receipt book showing regular monthly payments to an address in Brighton, a predominantly Russian neighborhood not far from us. The most recent payment had been made just 3 days before Richard's death. I sank back into the chair, trying to process everything I was seeing. The Richard Wilson. I knew the man who brought me tea in bed every Sunday morning, who remembered every anniversary with red roses, who called me his librarian with such affection, was a fiction. He had another name, another life, possibly another family. He had access to sums of money far beyond what his business should have generated. He had maintained elaborate deceptions for decades. Every sweet memory, every intimate moment, every shared experience, all were now cast in the shadow of doubt. Had any of it been real? Had he ever loved me? Or had I simply been a convenient cover story, a respectable American wife to solidify whatever identity he had constructed? As twilight fell outside the window, I realized I had been in the office for hours. My mind was racing with questions, theories, possibilities. But one thought kept returning. I needed to know the full truth, no matter how painful it might be. The address in Brighton seemed like the place to start. I carefully replaced everything except one of the passports, the family photograph, and the receipt book. These I took upstairs with me, hiding them in my knitting basket where Richard would never have looked. I locked the office door behind me, a habit I'd watched him perform countless times, and went upstairs to plan my next steps. That night, I barely slept. When I did, I dreamed of a stranger with Richard's face, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. The next morning, I woke with a strange sense of purpose. For 32 years, I had been a passive participant in my own marriage, accepting boundaries without question, ignoring inconsistencies, choosing comfortable ignorance over difficult truths. No more. I had been a librarian for decades. Research was my specialty, organizing information my expertise. I would approach this methodically, as I would have approached a challenging reference request at the library. I cleared off the dining room table and began to organize what I'd found into categories: identities, finances, communications, and personal connections. I photographed everything with my phone before returning most items to the office, not wanting to disrupt the scene too much in case there were security measures I hadn't discovered. The language barrier presented an immediate challenge. Many documents were in what I was increasingly certain was Russian, with some in German and Hebrew as well. I installed translation apps on my phone and began the tedious process of photographing and translating documents page by page. The passport in the name of Nikolai Petrov seemed to be the oldest and most worn. I began to think of it as his real name, though I had no way of knowing for certain. The birth date listed made him 5 years older than Richard had claimed to be. The birthplace was listed as Leningrad now, Street, Petersburg. There were entry and exit stamps for dozens of countries spanning decades, many from years when I believed Richard had been on domestic business trips. The financial documents were complex, showing a web of offshore accounts, shell corporations, and transactions involving millions of dollars. They went far beyond what a successful financial advisor in Boston should have been handling. Some transactions corresponded with news events I found when researching online market crashes, banking scandals, political upheavals in Eastern Europe. I compiled a timeline of Richard's or Nikolai's activities based on the dated entries in his notebooks. Certain patterns emerged. He would travel internationally 3 or 4 times a year, always explaining to me that he was attending financial conferences or meeting with important clients. These trips aligned with significant financial transactions noted in his records. The most concerning pattern was the regular payments to the Brighton address, 20 years of monthly transfers, always in cash, according to the receipt book. The amounts had increased over time, from $2,000 in the beginning to $5,000 in recent years. Who was receiving this money, and why? By the 3rd day of my investigation, I had a wall of notes and printouts that would have impressed the detectives in the crime shows Richard and I used to watch together on Sunday evenings. The irony was not lost on me. The computer remained a frustrating mystery. I had tried dozens of password combinations without success. Then I remembered something: the family photograph I'd found. On a hunch, I tried the names of the children from the picture, which I'd tentatively translated from documents as Alexei and Katya. Alexei Katya didn't work, nor did Katya Alexei. But Alexei and Katya 1984, using the apparent year of the photograph, unlocked the computer. What I found inside further confirmed my suspicions. emails in both English and Russian, using encrypted services, financial spreadsheets showing transactions far larger than anything Richard's legitimate business could explain, and more photographs, hundreds of them, documenting the growth of the two children from the original photo into adults. Recent pictures showed them at university graduations, weddings, with children of their own. A complete family record that had existed alongside our marriage without my knowledge. I also found records of Richard's surveillance activities. He had installed cameras in our home, including our bedroom, that I had never known about. Video files showed recordings of his meetings with various individuals in restaurants, parks, and hotel rooms around Boston. In these videos, Richard spoke fluent Russian, discussing business with men whose faces were often blurred or obscured. Email exchanges revealed that Richard appeared to have been feeding information to multiple parties over the years. Some communications suggested connections to Russian financial operations. Others indicated he might have been providing information to American interests as well. It was unclear whether he was a double agent, an informant, or simply playing all sides for his own benefit. As I dug deeper, I discovered several concerning emails from the weeks before Richard's death. They contained veiled threats, references to loose ends and insurance policies. Had someone suspected Richard of betrayal? Was his heart attack really natural? Or was there more to the story? My investigation took a frightening turn when I began to notice strange occurrences around the house. Twice I answered phone calls where no one spoke on the other end. A dark sedan parked across the street for hours one afternoon. When I went to check the mail, I found it had moved, but the same car or one very similar appeared the next day. I was being watched. The question was, by whom? With growing concern for my safety, I decided it was time to confront whatever awaited me at the Brighton address. I gathered key documents, the family photograph, and summoned my courage. Whatever Richard had been involved in, it had found its way to my doorstep. Hiding would solve nothing. I wrote down the address from the receipt book, mapped the location, and prepared myself for what would likely be the second most shocking confrontation of my life. The first had been with a dead man's secrets. This would be with the living consequences of his deception. Brighton is only about 7 miles from my suburb, but it might as well have been another country. As I drove through the neighborhood, street signs included both English and Cyrillic lettering. Russian bakeries, groceries, and restaurants lined the main thoroughfares. Older men played chess in the park, while women in headscarves chatted on nearby benches. I dressed carefully that morning, conservatively, in a navy dress and cardigan that I might have worn to work at the library. I didn't know who I would be meeting, but I wanted to project respectability and calm, despite the anxiety churning inside me. The address led me to a modest 3-story apartment building with a well-kept facade. Nothing fancy, but clean and respectable. I checked the names on the mailboxes in the entryway. Petrova was listed for apartment 3B. The feminine form of Petrov. My heart skipped a beat. I took the stairs slowly, rehearsing what I would say, though no words seemed adequate. At apartment 3B, I hesitated, then knocked firmly before I could lose my nerve. The woman who opened the door appeared to be in her early 60s, about my age, perhaps a few years younger. She had dark hair streaked with gray, intelligent eyes and high Slavic cheekbones. She wore a simple blouse and slacks and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She looked at me questioningly. "Can I help you?" she asked in accented but fluent English. I took a deep breath. "My name is Martha Wilson. I believe my husband, Richard Wilson, knew you. He passed away last week." The color drained from her face, and her hand flew to her throat. For a moment, I thought she might faint. Then she steadied herself against the doorframe. "Nikolai is dead?" she whispered. The name confirmation hit me like a physical blow. "Yes," I managed to say. "May I come in? I think we have a lot to discuss." She nodded mutely and stepped aside. The apartment was small but immaculate, furnished with a mix of American and Russian pieces. Family photos covered one wall, and there was Richard, in dozens of them, spanning decades, with this woman, with the children from the photograph I'd found, at birthdays, graduations, weddings. A lifetime captured in images. "I am Yelena," she said when she'd recovered enough to speak. "Yelena Petrova, you say you are Richard's wife? This cannot be. Nikolai Richard has been my husband for 40 years. We sat across from each other at her small kitchen table, Two women united by shock and betrayal. As I showed her the documents I'd brought, Yelena's story emerged in halting English punctuated by Russian expressions when emotion overwhelmed her vocabulary. She and Nikolai had married in Leningrad in 1982. They had immigrated to the United States in 1986 during a brief window of Soviet emigration, bringing their young children, Alexei and Katya. Nikolai had told her he worked for an international investment firm that required extensive travel. His absences when he was actually with me were explained as business trips. The monthly payments had supported Yelena and the children while he was traveling. He was good father, good provider, Yelena said, wiping tears with a linen handkerchief. Always made time for children when home. Alexei and Katya adore their papa. I felt strangely detached as I listened. It was as if we were discussing a mutual acquaintance rather than the man we had both called husband. In many ways, we were. The Richard I knew and the Nikolai she knew seemed to have been different men entirely. Did you ever suspect? I asked her. Yelena shook her head slowly. Sometimes, yes, small things. Phone calls he would take in other room. Strange hours. But international finance is demanding, no? And he always come back to us. Always remembered birthdays, anniversaries. 30 years in America, we build good life. Children go to university. We have grandchildren now. She gestured to photos of smiling toddlers. Grandchildren. Richard Nikolai had grandchildren. A whole family line I knew nothing about. He told me he was orphaned young, I said. That he had no family. His parents died in Siege of Leningrad, Yelena confirmed. But he has brother in Moscow still. Cousins in Israel. Family in Israel would explain the Hebrew documents, I realized. Another piece of the puzzle falling into place. You never knew about me? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Never, she said firmly. This is unbelievable, like bad American movie. She looked at me with sudden concern. You have children together? No, I replied. Richard Nikolai didn't want them. The words tasted bitter in my mouth. He hadn't wanted children with me, while he already had them with Yelena. An awkward silence fell between us. Two wives of the same man, trying to reconcile 30 years of shared history that had never intersected until this moment. Alexei and Katya should know, Yelena finally said. They come for dinner Sunday, always Sunday dinner when father was traveling. She paused, then added with surprising gentleness, Perhaps you would like to meet them? They should know truth also. The invitation caught me off guard. Part of me wanted to flee, to return to my house and pretend none of this was happening. But a stronger part, the part that had spent days methodically uncovering Richard's lies, needed to see this through to the end. Yes, I said, I would like that. But Yelena, there's more you should know. I don't think Richard Nikolai was just a financial advisor. I've found evidence that he might have been involved in other activities, possibly illegal ones. Yelena's expression hardened slightly. I think perhaps we have vodka now, and you tell me everything. Sunday is 3 days away. We have much to discuss before children arrive. As Yelena poured 2 small glasses of vodka from a frosted bottle she kept in the freezer, I wrestled with how much to tell her. Should I share my suspicions about Richard's connections to criminal organizations? The evidence of his possible role as an informant? The threatening emails before his death? I decided on honesty. Yelena deserved the truth as much as I did. As I began to explain what I'd discovered in Richard's office, I realized that Sunday dinner with her children would be just the beginning of a much longer, more complex journey than either of us could have imagined. Have you ever had a moment where you felt like you were watching your life unravel from outside your body? Drop a comment below with your story. Sometimes the most unexpected connections come from shared pain. Now, let me tell you what happened when I met the children my husband had kept secret from me for 3 decades. Sunday arrived with a sense of surrealism. I had spent the intervening days continuing my investigation while Yelena processed everything I'd told her. We spoke daily, sometimes for hours, comparing notes on the man we had both loved. It was strange how quickly we developed a rapport, 2 librarians, as it turned out. Yelena had worked at the Brighton branch of the Boston Public Library System, just miles from my own workplace, for 20 years. We had probably attended some of the same professional development sessions over the years, never knowing our connection. I arrived at Yelena's apartment an hour before Alexei and Katya were due. We had agreed to present a united front, to share what we knew without accusation or blame. Neither of us had created this situation, and fighting between ourselves would only serve the interests of a dead man who had betrayed us both. They are coming without spouses today, Yelena explained, as she prepared a traditional Russian meal. Better to tell just them first, I think. At precisely 2 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Yelena squeezed my hand briefly before going to answer it. The resemblance hit me immediately. Alexei, now 38, had Richard's height and build, the same strong jawline and confident posture. Katya, 35, had her father's eyes the same deep blue I had looked into every day for 32 years. They embraced their mother, speaking rapid Russian, before noticing me sitting quietly in the living room. "Mama, who is this?" Alexei asked in English, clearly for my benefit. Yelena took a deep breath. "This is Martha Wilson. She was married to your father for 32 years. At the same time, he was married to me." The silence that followed was deafening. Alexei's face darkened with anger, while Katya's registered shock, then confusion. "That's impossible," Alexei finally said. "This is some kind of scam. Papa just died, and this woman thinks she can claim some part of his estate? Call the police, Mama." "Sit down, Alexei," Yelena said firmly. "Listen first, then decide." For the next hour, Yelena and I took turns explaining everything. I showed them the documents I had brought, the photographs, the evidence of Richard's dual life. Alexei remained hostile, interrupting frequently with objections and accusations, while Katya listened intently, asking occasional clarifying questions. "This is all lies," Alexei insisted when we had finished. "My father was Nikolai Petrov, a respected investment specialist. He worked hard to give us a good life in America. This woman is making up stories about him now that he cannot defend himself. If I wanted his money, I wouldn't be here," I pointed out quietly. "I'd be at a lawyer's office. I came because I thought you deserved to know the truth. And because I'm trying to understand it myself." "Do you have proof?" Katya asked, speaking for the first time in several minutes. Her voice was calm, practical, real proof, not just documents that could be forged. I pulled out my phone and showed them photographs of our house, of Richard and me at various events over the years, our wedding photo. He lived with me in Brookline. His office is there, filled with evidence of his other identities and activities. You're welcome to see it for yourselves." Katya looked at her brother. "It explains a lot, Alexei. The constant travel, the strict rules about when we could call him, the way he never wanted us to visit his office. He worked for an international firm," Alexei insisted, but with less conviction. "He had important clients, confidentiality agreements. Your father claimed the same thing to me," I said gently. "Client confidentiality was why his home office door was always locked." Alexei ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so like Richard's that my heart ached. "This is insane. You're saying our father lived a complete double life for more than 30 years? That's impossible. Someone would have noticed." "Who would notice?" Katya countered. "We accepted his travel schedule as normal because it was all we ever knew." "And Mrs. Wilson." "Martha, please," I interjected. Martha accepted his client meetings for the same reason. He controlled when and how we could contact him. Remember how he always called us? Never the other way around except in emergencies? And even then, sometimes he wouldn't answer for hours. A heavy silence fell over the room as the reality began to sink in for all of us. Yelena served tea from a samovar, the familiar ritual seeming to comfort her as we processed the uncomfortable truths. "There's more," I said finally. "Based on what I found in his office, I don't believe Richard or Nikolai was just a financial advisor. There's evidence suggesting involvement in more complex financial operations, possibly illegal ones, and indications he might have been providing information to various governments or organizations." "A spy? Now you're saying my father was a spy?" Alexei's voice rose in disbelief. "I'm saying I don't know exactly what he was involved in," I clarified. "But there's too much evidence to ignore. Offshore accounts with millions of dollars, multiple passports, encrypted communications, surveillance equipment. It goes far beyond what either his public financial advisory business or his supposed international investment work would explain." Katya had been studying the documents I brought while we talked. "These account numbers," she said suddenly. "I recognize some of them. Papa would sometimes ask me to help him with transfers when his regular assistant was unavailable. He said it was for high-net-worth international clients. You helped him move money? Alexei asked, surprised. Just a few times. I have an accounting background, and he said he trusted me more than temporary staff. Katya looked up at me. I never saw anything that looked illegal, but the amounts were substantial. Did he ever mention what the money was for? I asked. She shook her head. Client confidentiality. Always client confidentiality. Alexei had been quiet, but now he spoke up. There was one thing that always seemed strange. Sometimes Papa would get calls that he'd take in Russian, but with an accent. Like he was pretending his Russian wasn't as good as it was. I asked him about it once, and he said it was for clients who felt more comfortable with someone who sounded like an American speaking their language. Another piece of the puzzle. Richard adapting his language abilities to fit whatever role he was playing at the moment. I work in IT security, Alexei said after another long silence. If you're serious about investigating this, I could help access his digital files. Properly, I mean. Not just what you've managed to find so far. The offer surprised me. I thought you didn't believe me. I don't want to believe you, he corrected. But I need to know the truth. For my mother's sake, for Katya, and for myself. I would appreciate your help, I said sincerely. There's a lot on his computer I haven't been able to access. As the afternoon wore on, the initial hostility gave way to a shared sense of purpose. We were all victims of Richard's deception, all trying to make sense of a man who had carefully compartmentalized his life into separate, non-overlapping segments. By the time I left that evening, we had formed an unlikely alliance. Alexei would come to my house the next day to examine Richard's computer and digital files. Katya would review the financial documents with her professional eye. We would pool our knowledge of the man who had been husband and father to us all, trying to reconstruct the complete picture he had so carefully kept fragmented. As I drove home, I realized that something unexpected had happened. In discovering Richard's betrayal, I had found connections I never expected to Yelena, to Alexei and Katya, to a family I never knew existed. It wasn't the family I had thought I had, but it was something real amid all the lies. And as strange as it might seem, there was comfort in that. The next morning, Alexei arrived at my house promptly at 9. Despite his initial hostility, he was unfailingly polite, removing his shoes at the door without being asked and complimenting the home's architecture. He carried a laptop bag and what looked like specialized equipment for digital forensics. I brought some tools from work, he explained, somewhat sheepishly. Technically, I'm supposed to use them only for client security audits, but, he shrugged. Extraordinary circumstances. I led him to Richard's office, which I had left largely undisturbed since my initial exploration. Alexei paused in the doorway, much as I had that first day, taking in the space where his father had spent so many hours. He had the same desk lamp, he observed quietly. In his study at our apartment. I remember doing homework there sometimes when I was young, when he wasn't traveling. These small connections, the shared experiences with a man who had been different people to different family members, continued to surprise me. We were piecing together a complete Richard, divided by Nikolai from our fragmented perspectives, like assembling a mosaic from shards of different colors. Alexei set up his equipment with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. He connected various devices to Richard's computer, bypassing password screens and accessing hidden files with a speed that would have impressed the detectives on those TV shows Richard and I used to watch. He used good security, Alexei commented as he worked. But not great security. It's like he knew enough to keep out an average person but wasn't expecting a professional to look at his systems. He glanced up at me. That's interesting in itself. If he was involved in something highly sensitive, you'd expect better protocols. Maybe he never expected anyone to look, I suggested. Or maybe he wanted to be found out eventually. Alexei considered this. Maybe. Or perhaps he was just overconfident. He turned back to the screen, which was now displaying files I had never seen before. For the next several hours, we sifted through digital evidence of Richard's hidden life. Alexei explained what we were seeing, as we went encrypted email exchanges with various contacts using code names, financial transfers that bounced through multiple offshore accounts before reaching their destinations, surveillance footage from meetings with individuals whose faces were sometimes blurred. He was recording his own meetings, Alexei noted, frowning. Why would he do that unless he was gathering information on these people? Insurance, I suggested. protection in case something went wrong. In one particularly disturbing video, Richard spoke fluent Russian with a man whose face was obscured. They discussed what sounded like money laundering operations involving several Boston businesses. Richard was providing specific account details and suggesting methods to make the transactions appear legitimate. "That's not investment advice," Alexei said grimly. "That's facilitation." We found extensive email exchanges that suggested Richard had been feeding information to multiple parties over the years. Some communications were with individuals who appeared to be connected to Russian financial interests. Others seemed to be with American contacts, possibly law enforcement or intelligence. "I think he was playing both sides," Alexei said, his expression troubled. "Helping Russian operators move money while simultaneously informing on them to American authorities." "A double agent?" I asked. "Or just looking out for himself, playing everyone against each other to maximize his own advantage and protection?" Alexei ran a hand through his hair, that gesture again, so like his father's. "It explains why he needed such elaborate compartmentalization in his life. One side couldn't know about the other. The most disturbing discovery came in a folder of emails from the weeks before Richard's death. Several contained veiled threats, references to someone having lost confidence in Richard's loyalty. One particularly chilling message read simply, "Insurance policies can be canceled at any time." These came from different email addresses, Alexei noted, but the linguistic patterns suggest they might be from the same person or group. Someone suspected him of betrayal. "Do you think his heart attack wasn't natural?" I asked the question that had been haunting me. Alexei hesitated. "It's possible. There are methods that can induce cardiac events that look natural. But we'd need an autopsy to know for sure. And he's already been cremated, right?" I nodded. Richard had been explicit in his will cremation, no autopsy unless legally required. I had honored his wishes without question. Now I wondered if that, too, had been part of his plan. As we worked, Alexei received periodic text updates from Katya, who was examining the financial records. She had traced several of the offshore accounts and found connections to known shell companies used by Russian oligarchs and criminal organizations. The amounts involved were staggering tens of millions of dollars moved through accounts Richard had access to. "This is far beyond what an investment advisor should be handling," Alexei said, showing me Katya's findings. "These are the kind of transactions that get flagged by international financial crime units." By late afternoon, we had uncovered enough to be certain. Richard Wilson, divided by Nikolai Petrov, had been operating at the intersection of international finance, organized crime, and intelligence gathering for decades. He had maintained his double life with meticulous attention to detail, keeping his two families completely separate while playing dangerous games with dangerous people. And now, with him gone, those people might be looking for whatever insurance he had kept. As if confirming my fears, Alexei discovered a folder of surveillance images showing our house taken from various positions around the neighborhood. The most recent were dated just 2 days earlier. "Someone's watching the house," he said, his voice tight. "These aren't your husband's images. The metadata shows they were taken after his death." A chill ran through me. "I've noticed cars parked on the street. Strange phone calls." Alexei immediately pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my mother and sister. They need to be careful too." After a brief conversation in Russian, he turned back to me. "Katya says someone tried to enter their apartment building yesterday. The security system alerted them to a forced door." "What do we do?" I asked, trying to keep the panic from my voice. "We need to go to the authorities," Alexei said firmly. "FBI, not local police. This is clearly interstate, probably international. But first," he turned back to the computer and began copying files to an external drive. "We need to preserve everything we found. It's our only leverage." As Alexei worked, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I showed it to him. "Put it on speaker," he whispered. "Don't give anything away." I answered cautiously. "Hello? Mrs. Wilson." A male voice, accentless and professional. "My name is Agent Donovan with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We need to speak with you regarding your late husband's activities. Would you be available to meet tomorrow morning?" I looked at Alexei, who nodded slowly. "Yes," I replied. "I think that would be a good idea. In fact, I'm not alone right now. Richard's other family is here with me. We've been discovering some concerning things." There was a pause on the other end. I see. That's an unexpected development. We'll need to speak with all of you. Please don't discuss this matter with anyone else in the meantime. Your safety may depend on it. After arranging a meeting time, I hung up and looked at Alexei. They already knew, I said. They were watching Richard. Or watching whoever is watching us, Alexei suggested. Either way, we're in the middle of something much bigger than a man with two families. The question is, can we trust these FBI agents? Or is this another layer of Richard's game? I had no answer. In the space of a week, my entire understanding of reality had been upended. The man I had loved for 32 years was a stranger. The comfortable retirement I had envisioned was now threatened by unknown dangers. And my only allies were the family I never knew my husband had. As night fell, Alexei insisted on staying in the guest room rather than leaving me alone. Katya is staying with Mom tonight. We shouldn't be isolated until we know more. That night, as I lay awake, listening to unfamiliar sounds, Alexei moving about in the guest room, the occasional car passing on the street outside, I realized how completely my life had changed. Nothing would ever be the same again. But strangely, I felt more alive, more present than I had in years. The comfortable numbness of my marriage had been replaced by fear, yes, but also by a fierce determination to uncover the complete truth. Richard had underestimated me. Whoever was watching us was underestimating me too. They didn't know that Martha Wilson, retired librarian, had spent her life finding information that others had tried to hide. They didn't know that the quiet, unassuming woman who had accepted a locked office door for 32 years was gone. In her place was someone new, someone determined to uncover every last secret, no matter the cost. Agent Donovan arrived at precisely 10 a.m. the next day, accompanied by a woman who introduced herself as Agent Carrillo. They were both in their 40s, dressed in the unmistakable dark suits of federal agents, with the alert, observant manner of people trained to notice details. I had asked Yelena, Alexei, and Katya to join us, wanting us all to hear the same information at the same time. After presenting their credentials, which Alexei examined carefully, the agents sat across from us in my living room. The five of us must have made a strange tableau: two middle-aged women and two younger adults, facing two FBI agents, united only by our connection to a dead man who had deceived us all. "We've been aware of your husband's activities for some time, Mrs. Wilson," Agent Donovan began, his tone professional but not unkind. "What I'm about to tell you is classified, but given the circumstances and the potential risk to all of you, we've been authorized to share certain information." "You knew he had two families?" I asked, still struggling to understand how Richard's deception could have continued for so long without official notice. "Not specifically, no," Agent Carrillo interjected. "We knew him as Nikolai Petrov, a person of interest in several financial investigations. His connection to you, Mrs. Wilson, was documented in his file, but the nature of your relationship was listed as business associate and landlord. Clearly, he managed to compartmentalize his life even in our intelligence." "What was he involved in?" Alexei asked directly. The agents exchanged glances. "Mr. Petrov operated in a gray area of international finance for decades," Donovan explained. "He began as a financial facilitator for Russian interests in the late 1982, helping to move Soviet money into Western markets before the fall of the USSR. After the Soviet collapse, he continued working with various Russian business interests, some legitimate, others less so. He was laundering money for the Russian mafia," Katya said flatly. "Among other activities," Agent Carrillo confirmed. "But approximately 15 years ago, he approached the FBI offering information on some of his clients. He became what we call a confidential informant, providing intelligence on Russian financial operations in the U.S. "A double agent," I said, recalling our discovery. "Triple, actually," Donovan corrected. "About 10 years ago, he also began working with certain Russian intelligence interests, feeding them information about American financial vulnerabilities. And we have reason to believe he was playing both sides against the middle, withholding key information from both to maintain his own leverage and protection." Yelena, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "So our husband, our father, was criminal, FBI informant, Russian spy, all at same time?" "That's a fairly accurate summary, Mrs. Petrova," Carrillo acknowledged. "He was extraordinarily careful, extraordinarily intelligent, and extraordinarily duplicitous. He maintained multiple identities and multiple loyalties for decades without being caught. In intelligence circles, that's unprecedented. "Why are you telling us this now?" I asked. "Why not approach me immediately after his death?" "Frankly, we didn't think you knew anything," Donovan admitted. "Based on our surveillance, you appeared to be exactly what he presented you as, an innocent spouse with no knowledge of his activities. We were monitoring the situation, waiting to see who might come looking for his records or contacts." "Someone is watching the house," Alexei said. "We found surveillance photos dated after his death." "Yes," Kirillo confirmed. "Multiple interested parties are looking for what we believe is Petrov's insurance policy blackmail material he collected on his various associates and handlers over the years." He hinted at having accumulated significant compromising information that would be released if anything happened to him. "His heart attack," I began, "was likely natural, according to the medical examiner," Donovan said. "But we can't rule out the possibility of an induced cardiac event. There are methods that leave little trace, especially when followed by cremation." "So, what happens now?" Katya asked, ever practical. "Are we in danger?" "Potentially, yes," Kirillo said bluntly. "Until Petrov's insurance material is located, various parties will continue to search for it. They may believe one or all of you know where it is, or have access to it. We've discovered significant digital material," Alexei informed them. "Financial records, communications, surveillance footage. We'll need to see everything," Donovan said. "But even more importantly, we need to ensure your safety. We're prepared to offer all of you temporary witness protection until the situation is resolved." The suggestion hung in the air. Witness protection would mean leaving our homes, our jobs, our identities, everything that anchored us to our lives. "No," I said firmly. "This is my home. Richard took enough from me with his lies. I won't let him or his associates take anything more." "It's too dangerous for you to stay here alone," Kirillo argued. "She won't be alone," Alexei said unexpectedly. "I'll stay with her. I have some experience with security systems and countermeasures from my work." Yelena and Katya exchanged glances. "We stay together," Yelena declared. "All of us, stronger that way." The agents seemed surprised by our solidarity, but didn't argue further. Instead, they outlined enhanced security measures, surveillance of both properties, panic buttons, regular check-ins with local FBI contacts. They also requested access to all the material we'd discovered. "There's one more thing you should know," Donovan added before they left. "Petrov's death has created a vacuum in certain intelligence channels. Information he was providing to both sides has stopped flowing. That makes this situation even more volatile. Certain organizations are not only looking for his insurance policy, but also for someone to replace his function in their operations." "You think they might approach one of us?" Katya asked incredulously. "It's possible," Kirillo acknowledged. "Especially you, Mr. Petrov. You share your father's name, potentially his connections. From their perspective, you might be seen as a logical successor." Alexei looked troubled by this suggestion but said nothing. After the agents left with copies of our digital evidence, the four of us remained in my living room, processing everything we'd learned. "This is insane," Alexei finally said. "A week ago, my father was a respected investment specialist who traveled too much. Now he's some kind of triple agent who maintained two separate families while playing international spy games. And we're caught in the middle," Katya added soberly. "We need better security here," Alexei decided, already examining the locks on my doors and windows. "And at your apartment, Mom." "I stay here tonight," Yelena declared. "Tomorrow we bring things from apartment, safer together." I was touched by their protective instincts, these people who had been strangers to me just days ago. "There's plenty of room," I assured them. "The house has 4 bedrooms. Richard always insisted we needed the space for on guests." The irony wasn't lost on any of us. That evening, as Yelena helped me prepare dinner in my kitchen, an oddly domestic scene given the circumstances, I caught her looking at the photographs on my refrigerator. Pictures of Richard and me on vacations, at dinner parties, celebrating anniversaries. "He looks happy," she observed quietly. "With you." "He looked happy with you too," I replied, remembering the family photographs in her apartment. "I think maybe he was happy in both lives, just differently." "Different versions of himself," she agreed. "But which was real?" Maybe they all were, I suggested. Or maybe none of them. As night fell, Alexei installed temporary security measures, motion sensors, cameras linked to his laptop, additional locks. We established a rotation for keeping watch through the night, though I doubted any of us would sleep much anyway. Around midnight, as I sat in the darkened living room during my watch shift, I noticed a car slowing as it passed the house. It continued down the street but then parked about 100 yards away. I watched for several minutes as a figure remained seated inside, apparently observing the house. I woke Alexei, who immediately checked his security feeds. They're staying outside the perimeter, he noted. Probably just surveillance, not an immediate threat. The FBI is likely watching them too. This is our life now, I said, the reality of our situation sinking in. Being watched. Watching those who watch us. Until we find the insurance policy, Alexei reminded me. That's what they're all looking for. If we find it first, we have leverage. But where would he hide something so important? I wondered aloud. We've searched the office thoroughly. Maybe it's not in the office, Alexei suggested. Maybe it's somewhere nobody would think to look because it's too obvious. His words triggered a memory, something Richard had said years ago when I'd asked where he kept our important documents. Hide in plain sight, he'd advised. The best place to hide something important is somewhere so obvious no one would consider it significant. I think I might know where to look, I said slowly. But we'll need to wait until morning. That night, as I finally lay down for a few hours of rest, I found myself thinking about the man I had married. Had he ever loved me? Had any of it been real? Or had I simply been a convenient cover story, a respectable American wife to solidify his legend? And if we found his insurance policy, what would it reveal about the man who had been at the center of all our lives? The next morning, I led Alexei, Katya, and Yelena to the built-in bookshelves in the living room. Unlike the office bookshelves, which were filled with financial texts and reference volumes, these held my collection classics, mysteries, biographies, and Richard's occasional contributions, mainly historical works and spy novels, ironically enough. Richard gave me a book every anniversary, I explained, running my fingers along a specific shelf, always with an inscription. It became our tradition. I pulled out a volume entitled The Man Who Was Thursday by G.K. Chesterton, a novel about secret agents and hidden identities. The irony wasn't lost on me. It had been Richard's gift for our 30th anniversary, 2 years before his death. Opening the cover, I showed them the inscription. To my librarian who knows that the most valuable things are often hidden in plain sight. All my love, Richard. This has to be it, I said. It's too perfect. The book appeared normal at first glance, but when I examined it more closely, I noticed the binding was slightly thicker than it should have been. Alexei took it from me and carefully investigated the cover. There's something inside the binding, he confirmed. Using a small pocket knife, he delicately separated the binding from the cover, revealing a slim USB drive hidden within. We gathered around Alexei's laptop as he inserted the drive, his security software automatically scanning it for malware before opening its contents. The drive contained a single encrypted file. After several attempts with passwords based on names and dates significant to both families, Alexei tried Thursday Man 1982, combining the book title with the year Richard and Yelena had married. The file opened, revealing a video recording of Richard sitting at his desk in the office. The timestamp showed it had been created just 1 week before his death. If you're watching this, Richard began, looking directly into the camera, then I'm gone, and you found what everyone is looking for. Martha, my dear librarian, I knew if anyone would understand my clue, it would be you. My heart constricted at his familiar voice, his small smile. Even now, knowing everything, I felt the pull of our connection. I've lived many lives, he continued. Born Nikolai Petrov in Leningrad, reborn as Richard Wilson in Boston, and several other identities in between. I've been a financial advisor, a money launderer, an informant, and occasionally, something approaching a spy. I've worked for the Russian mafia, for oligarchs, for the FBI, and for departments of the Russian government that officially don't exist. He paused, his expression growing more serious. And I've been a husband and father twice over. This is my confession, my explanation, and my apology to both my families, who I expect may be watching this together. For the next 30 minutes, Richard, divided by Nikolai, laid out the complete story of his life. His early work helping Soviet officials move money out of the USSR before its collapse. His immigration to America with Yelena and their children. His recruitment by elements of what would become the Russian mafia. His subsequent approach to the FBI offering information. His creation of the Richard Wilson identity as both cover and escape. Meeting Martha wasn't planned, he admitted, causing me to catch my breath. It was supposed to be a brief connection to strengthen my American identity. But I fell in love with her quiet strength, her intelligence, her stability. I couldn't give her up, even though maintaining 2 complete lives meant constant vigilance, constant deception. He went on to explain how he had balanced his 2 families for decades, using his supposed international business travel as the mechanism to switch between identities. He had maintained separate phones, separate calendars, separate memories, all while moving millions of dollars through various financial channels and providing just enough intelligence to both American and Russian handlers to maintain his value. The insurance policy everyone is looking for isn't just this confession, he explained. It's also the attached files containing evidence of crimes committed by various individuals in both American and Russian organizations. Names, dates, account numbers, recordings, everything needed to dismantle several major criminal operations and implicate government officials on both sides. He looked tired suddenly, older than I remembered him. I never intended things to go this far. What began as financial opportunity became a trap I couldn't escape. Every side thought I worked for them, while I was really only trying to protect both my families. As the video neared its end, Richard leaned closer to the camera. Martha, Yelena, Alexei, Katya, I loved you all, in my way. The compartmentalization necessary to maintain my double life made me, perhaps, incapable of the kind of complete love you all deserved. But what love I had was real. He explained that he had created trust funds for both families, hidden from his various employers and handlers. You'll find the details in the encrypted folder. There's enough to ensure everyone's security for the rest of your lives, provided you're careful. His final instructions were clear. Take this drive to the FBI contact whose information is included. They've been building a case against several targets for years, but lacked sufficient evidence. My insurance policy will give them everything they need, and in exchange, they'll provide protection for all of you. The video ended with Richard looking directly into the camera. I lived as many men. I die as none of them. And all of them. Forgive me, if you can. We sat in stunned silence when the video ended. Yelena wiped tears from her eyes, while Katya placed a comforting hand on her mother's shoulder. Alexei stared at the screen, his expression unreadable. We should contact the FBI immediately, I said finally, reaching for my phone. Before I could make the call, a sharp knock at the front door startled us all. Alexei checked the security camera feed on his laptop. It's a man in a suit, he reported. Not one of the FBI agents from yesterday. Don't answer it, Katya advised. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. Then, ominously, we heard the sound of a key in the lock. He has a key, I whispered, suddenly remembering that Richard had always handled the locks and security for the house. Of course, he would have given keys to his associates as a precaution. Alexei moved quickly, positioning himself behind the door as it opened. A tall man in an expensive suit entered, his posture confident, his expression cold. He looked to be in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and the hard eyes of someone accustomed to giving orders that were obeyed without question. Mrs. Wilson, he said, spotting me immediately. His accent was faintly Eastern European but polished smooth by years of international business. I apologize for the intrusion, but I have urgent business regarding your late husband. Who are you? I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. My name is not important, he replied dismissively. What matters is that your husband was holding certain files for safekeeping. I've come to retrieve them. Yelena and Katya remained seated on the couch, Katya subtly moving her hand to her purse where I knew she kept her phone. The man hadn't noticed Alexei behind the door. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, playing for time. My husband was a financial advisor. Any client files would be at his office downtown. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. Mrs. Wilson, we both know that's not true. Nikolai kept his most important insurance policies here, where no one would think to look for them. I need those files now. Nikolai? I feigned confusion. My husband's name was Richard. The man's expression hardened. We don't have time for games. the materials Nikolai or Richard, if you prefer collected, could cause significant problems for people who are not accustomed to having problems. Problems they would prefer to avoid creating for you and your husband's other family. He knew about Yelena and the children. My blood ran cold. I don't respond well to threats, I said, surprising myself with my steadiness. It's not a threat, merely a statement of cause and effect, the man replied. Now, I believe you've recently discovered a USB drive hidden in a book. I'll take that, and then I'll leave you all to your grief. He knew about the drive. He must have been watching the house, possibly even had the place bugged. I exchanged glances with Katya, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. The drive is in my husband's office, I said, gesturing toward the hallway. I'll get it for you. I think we'll go together, the man countered, moving toward me. That was when Alexei made his move, lunging from behind the door to tackle the intruder. They crashed into the entryway table, sending a lamp shattering to the floor as they grappled. The man was stronger than he looked, and despite Alexei's younger age and athletic build, the intruder quickly gained the upper hand, pinning Alexei against the wall. I saw the glint of metal as the man reached inside his jacket, presumably for a weapon. Without thinking, I grabbed the heavy crystal vase from the side table and brought it down on the back of his head with all my strength. The man staggered, releasing Alexei, who immediately drove his knee into the intruder's midsection. As they continued to struggle, the front door burst open again. Agents Donovan and Carrillo rushed in, weapons drawn, followed by 2 more agents in tactical gear. FBI! Freeze! Donovan shouted. The intruder, seeing he was outnumbered, raised his hands slowly. This is a misunderstanding, he began, his accent suddenly thicker. I am merely here to offer condolences to the widow of my old friend. Save it, Orlov, Agent Carrillo said, handcuffing him efficiently. We've been tracking you since you entered the country on Tuesday. As the agents took the man Orlov, apparently into custody, Donovan turned to us. Are you all right? We nodded, still shaken by the confrontation. We found it, I told him, indicating the laptop where Richard's video was paused. Richard's insurance policy. He left instructions to turn it over to you. Donovan looked surprised but pleased. That's a significant development. We'll need to secure it immediately. As one of the other agents escorted Orlov to a waiting vehicle, Carrillo explained that they had been monitoring several individuals who had entered the country shortly after Richard's death. Orlov is a senior operative for a Russian intelligence branch that specializes in financial operations, she told us. He was Petrov's Richard's handler for many years. When our surveillance showed him approaching the house, we moved in. While Donovan secured the USB drive and laptop as evidence, Carrillo continued. This should be enough to shut down several major operations. Petrov's information, combined with what we've already gathered, will be invaluable. What happens to us now? Katya asked. You'll need to remain under protection until all the individuals involved are in custody, Carrillo explained. But with Petrov's evidence, that process should move much more quickly than we anticipated. As the agents prepared to leave with the evidence, Donovan paused at the door. There's one more thing you should know. We found a letter from your husband in his safety deposit box at Boston First National. It was to be delivered to all of you in the event of his death. He handed me a sealed envelope. Apparently, he anticipated almost everything. After the agents left, promising to post officers outside both our house and Yelena's apartment, the 4 of us gathered around the dining room table. The confrontation with Orlov had shaken us all, but there was also a sense of forward movement, of pieces finally falling into place. I opened the envelope Donovan had given us and found a handwritten letter addressed to all 4 of us by name. Richard's familiar handwriting brought an unexpected lump to my throat. My dear ones, the letter began. If you're reading this, then you've discovered the truth I could never bring myself to reveal in life. I've recorded the practical details of my activities and arrangements in the video you've hopefully found by now, but this letter is more personal. To live a divided life is to never be fully present in either one. I recognize the pain and confusion my deceptions have caused you all. What began as necessity became habit, and eventually a prison of my own making. Martha, my librarian, you gave me peace and stability when my life had neither. Your quiet strength and unwavering loyalty were gifts I never deserved. Yelena, my first love, you gave me a family and kept our Russian heart alive in a foreign land. Your resilience through our early struggles laid the foundation for everything that followed. Alexei and Katya, my children, You were my greatest accomplishment and my deepest regret. I watched you grow from a distance that was never of your making. I leave you with 2 requests. First, find a way forward together. You are now connected by a shared truth, however painful. Second, forgive me if you can, not for my sake, but for your own peace. All my love, divided but real. Richard, divided by Nikolai. In the silence that followed, I looked at the faces around my dining room table, strangers a week ago, now bound to me by the strangest of circumstances. In Richard's deception, we had found an unexpected connection to each other. It wasn't the family any of us had thought we had, but it was real in a way that my marriage, I now realized, had never fully been. As evening fell, we remained together, sharing memories of the different versions of the man we had all loved, gradually piecing together a more complete picture of who Richard or Nikolai had really been. 3 months after the confrontation in my living room, the world had shifted dramatically. The evidence from Richard's insurance policy had led to the arrest of 27 individuals across 3 countries, the freezing of hundreds of millions in illegally obtained assets, and the dismantling of a major money laundering network that had operated for decades. The FBI had kept us updated throughout the process, partly out of professional courtesy and partly, I suspect, because they remained fascinated by Richard's unprecedented double life. I had sold the Colonial in Brookline, unable to continue living in a space so filled with memories and deceptions. The house had fetched a good price in the Boston market, adding to the already substantial trust fund Richard had established for me. After 3 decades in the same home, I had downsized to a 2-bedroom condominium closer to the city center and, not coincidentally, within walking distance of Yelena's apartment in Brighton. The FBI had officially closed their protection detail the previous month, after the last of Richard's former associates had been apprehended in Cyprus. Agent Carrillo had personally delivered the news, along with a more complete explanation of Richard's activities than we had previously received. Your husband was a unique case in our experience, she had told me. Sitting in my new living room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, he began as a genuine asset for Russian interests, then became a double agent for us, then effectively a triple agent playing both sides while maintaining his own agenda. In intelligence circles, they've begun using the term the Petrov paradigm to describe his methodology. Is that supposed to make me proud? I had asked, unsure how I felt about Richard becoming a case study for future spies. Not proud, perhaps, Carrillo had replied thoughtfully, but it might help you understand that what he did was extraordinary, even if it was built on deception. He maintained complete compartmentalization for over 30 years without a single mistake or leak between his worlds. That requires a kind of psychological discipline that most people simply don't possess. That evening, as I unpacked my books in the new apartment, Alexei arrived to install my final bookshelves. He had taken a leave of absence from his IT security job to help both his mother and me transition to our new circumstances. His initial hostility had gradually transformed into a protective concern that sometimes reminded me painfully of Richard. The FBI agent is right, you know, he commented, as he tightened the last screws into the wall. What my father did was wrong, but it was also remarkable. Most people can't keep a surprise birthday party secret for a week, let alone maintain separate identities for decades. I'm not sure that makes it better, I replied, unpacking a box of mysteries. Extraordinary deception is still deception. True, Alexei acknowledged, stepping back to admire his handiwork. But I've been thinking about it differently lately. What if he wasn't living a double life so much as living 2 genuine lives? What if both versions of him were real, just, separate? I had considered this possibility often over the past months. You mean he compartmentalized so effectively that Richard and Nikolai were essentially different people sharing the same body? Something like that, Alexei nodded. The man who raised me, who taught me to play chess, who helped me with math homework, who came to my college graduation, that man was real. His love for me and Katya and Mom was real, just as his love for you was real in its own context. There was wisdom in Alexei's perspective that brought me an unexpected measure of peace. The Richard I had known, the man who had remembered every anniversary, who had nursed me through pneumonia with such tender care, who had supported my career and interests, had been real in the moments we shared together, even if the totality of his life had been hidden from me. Yelena had reached a similar conclusion in her own way. When we had dinner together that evening, a weekly tradition we had established since the revelation, she expressed it in her characteristically direct manner. In Russia, we have saying, "Truth has many faces," she told me as we shared a bottle of wine in her kitchen. Nikolai showed different faces to different people, but all faces were still his. Katya had joined us, bringing her 5-year-old son Misha, who had quickly appointed me his American grandmother. The boy was currently absorbed in a puzzle I had given him, his dark hair and serious expression occasionally catching the light in ways that painfully recalled Richard. "I found more photos yesterday while clearing out the storage unit," Katya mentioned, serving dessert. "From when we first came to America. Papa is holding Alexei on his shoulders at Revere Beach. He looks so young, so happy." We had been sharing these discoveries, photographs, letters, mementos, from both families, gradually piecing together the complete story of Richard, divided by Nikolai's life. Each new finding was both painful and healing, another piece of the complex mosaic of the man we had all loved. The most unexpected outcome of Richard's deception had been the bond formed between our two families. What had begun as a shared trauma had evolved into genuine affection and connection. Yelena and I, close in age and sharing professional backgrounds, had discovered a friendship that neither of us had anticipated. Alexei had appointed himself a protective figure for both his mother and me, handling everything from home repairs to financial advice. Katya had welcomed me into her young family's life, giving me the grandparent experience I had never expected to have. For Thanksgiving, our first major holiday after everything had happened, we had gathered at my new condominium. Yelena had prepared traditional Russian dishes alongside my American standards. Alexei had brought his new girlfriend, who knew the whole story and seemed remarkably unfazed by it. Katya's husband had carved the turkey, while Misha had solemnly explained the holiday to me from his kindergarten perspective. In that moment, surrounded by a family I had never known, existed 9 months earlier, I had felt a strange sense of gratitude amid the lingering grief and betrayal. Richard's deception had been profound and painful, but it had also, unexpectedly, given me a family in my later years when I had long since abandoned the hope of having one. On the anniversary of Richard's death, the 4 of us visited the columbarium where his ashes were interred. We stood together before the simple plaque that bore only his American name and dates. Should we have put both names? Katya wondered aloud. Nikolai Petrov and Richard Wilson? Which was more real? Alexei countered. Were either of them completely real? Both real, both not real, Yelena said philosophically. Like quantum physics. Schrodinger's husband, I suggested with a wry smile, and we all laughed, a genuine moment of shared humor that would have been unimaginable months earlier. As we placed flowers before the plaque, red roses from me, white lilies from Yelena, a tradition we had established, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us to this point. The locked office door that had protected Richard's secrets for so many years had ultimately opened a door to an unexpected connection with these people who now felt like family. We had all been victims of Richard's deception, but we had refused to be defined by it. Instead, we had forged something new from the fragments of the lives he had constructed and then abandoned. There was a poetic justice in that, I thought, a redemption that transformed betrayal into connection. Later that evening, as we shared a quiet dinner at my condominium, Yelena raised her glass in a toast. To truth, she said simply, however painful. To family, Alexei added. However unexpected. To moving forward, Katya continued. To doors that open, I concluded, thinking of that locked office door that had protected Richard's secrets for so many years, and the surprising gifts they sometimes reveal. We clinked glasses in the warm light of my new dining room, united by the man who had deceived us all and, in doing so, had ultimately brought us together. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again, but sometimes what rushes in isn't destruction, but a new kind of love and connection you never expected to find. If you've ever discovered an unexpected truth that changed everything you thought you knew, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Sometimes the most painful revelations lead to the most meaningful connections. Please like this video if my story resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life family stories, and share with someone who might need to hear that even the deepest betrayals can sometimes lead to healing. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes the families we find are more meaningful than the ones we're born into.